Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. Today's video is going to be a review on the new Tarte Shape Tape foundation. If you haven't seen it already, my previous video was a first impressions on this foundation. I'll have it linked down below in case you're interested, but today's video is going to be more in-depth. I've been wearing it for about a week now. I've been testing it out different ways and I now have a more well-rounded opinion. So if you are new to my channel, feel free to subscribe. I upload a new video every single week, and let's go ahead and get started with the review. So this foundation comes in two different formulas. This is the matte version, which has the purple ring around the top, and there's also a hydrating version which has a light blue ring around the top. I didn't purchase the hydrating one to test out because I generally just prefer matte foundations. However, this one claims to be full coverage, whereas the hydrating one does not. This one on the website, it's recommended that you apply it with a brush, specifically a paddle brush, but I think any brush is generally fine. Whereas the hydrating one, they recommend that you apply with a makeup sponge. And I would assume that's because with a brush you get more coverage with any foundation in general, and with a makeup sponge it helps to keep your makeup hydrated. So it just plays to their strengths. In terms of pricing, these cost $39 US or 66 New Zealand dollars, which is pretty reasonable for a high-end foundation. If I give you a comparison, my NARS Sheer Glow foundation cost me $80 or $85 with a pump. So this is actually a fair bit cheaper, and they come with the same amount, which is 30 mils. We do have to talk about the shade range. I'm not going to drag Tarte through the mud like a lot of other people have been, but we do need to mention the fact that there are not enough shades. Tarte came out with 15 shades of this foundation, 3 of which are deep, but there is nowhere near enough variation with those deep shades. They needed way more than 3. And even on the lighter end of the spectrum, this was the lightest shade that they had for the matte formula, and it's fine for me. I'm wearing it today. As you can see, it matches. It might be a little bit light at the moment because it's summer, but in winter this would be my perfect match. And I am not the lightest person. The hydrating formula does have a porcelain shade which is lighter than this, but where is it for the matte formula? Anyway, so Tarte have released a statement saying that they are going to be bringing out more shades and apologising for not doing it in the first place, which they are fixing the mistake, but it's kind of not good enough. At the same time though, there are still brands that only bring out like 2 or 3 shades of something, which is way worse. So good on Tarte for trying and also for fixing their mistake once they've made it. Let's just hope it doesn't happen again. Let's talk about the packaging. I do like that it's a frosted glass finish, and I like that they have the different colours for the different formulas. It makes it really easy to know, like if you have both for example, it makes it really easy to just know which one you're picking up. And also the hydrating one has a little water drop on the front, so you'd know by looking at that as well. It has a screw top, which kind of confused me in the first impressions, but it then has like a concealer wand kind of applicator, and I do actually quite like this. I think it's way less messy than a pump. For example, if you were to go traveling with this, you know that it's not going to leak out the pump or whatever. I think it's very sturdy packaging, and it kind of means that you are more in control of how much you're applying, whereas with a pump you kind of just get whatever the pump gives you. If you saw my first impressions, you would have noticed that I was not all that impressed by the box that it came in, but like, everyone throws the box away, so really who cares? This is what matters, and I think that they did a pretty good job with the packaging. And let's talk about how it actually performs. So the first time that I used this, I applied it with no primer and no setting powder just to see how it would hold up by itself. And you will have seen this if you watched my first impressions video, but just in case you didn't, I'll go over it quickly now. I also applied it with a brush because that's how the website said to apply it. So I found that it blended quite easily. I wasn't noticing any streaky bits or patchiness, and it did actually set itself. It felt completely dry, not immediately, but after a few minutes without having to set it with a powder. It definitely looked matte, although I'm not sure how well that came across on camera because I have a big studio light behind my camera and it always makes me sweat, so it always looks like I have a hydrating foundation on. But in real life, when I wasn't filming, it definitely looked matte, and I also felt that it looked natural as well. I don't really know how to explain it. I guess the best way to describe it is just it didn't look heavy. Like, I think it was definitely obvious that I was wearing makeup, but you couldn't like see it sitting on my skin, if you know what I mean. It does have high coverage, but maybe not with just one layer, or it might have been because I didn't apply that much. With one layer for me, I would have called it a medium coverage, and then it was buildable. I applied a little bit more over top and I definitely felt like it was more full coverage after a second layer. And I've heard a lot of people say that they're not impressed because it says it's full coverage and they don't think it is full coverage, but in my opinion, it's better to be medium buildable, because then you have two purposes as a foundation. You know, you can wear it as your medium coverage foundation like I am today. I only applied one layer today, or you can build it up and have it be really full coverage too. My makeup applied really nicely over the top, even though I hadn't used a setting powder. Normally if I don't use a setting powder, I'll get like splotchiness where my blush and my bronzer and stuff is like sticking to my foundation. So that didn't happen, which was actually amazing. I found that it lasted nicely for approximately 8 hours. It looked the same as it did when I first applied it, for about 8 hours. And then once we hit that 8-hour mark, it just started looking dry, and then it just got worse until the end of the day. Now, I do have normal to dry skin. I have seen a couple of first impression videos from people that have oily skin, and they have said that it looks better the longer they leave it on through the day. It does claim to soak up oil, so I would assume that that's why. So throughout the day for oily skin, this is soaking up their oil and making it look better, whereas for me with normal to dry skin, it's just making my skin drier through the day. So that's something to keep in mind. Just be aware, if you have dry skin, it might not be the perfect foundation for you. If you have oily skin, it might be a better match. Anyway, I'm going to insert a clip here from the end of that first day, just to show you what it looks like. This is how it's looking after 12 hours of having it on. As you can probably see, it has started to make my skin look quite dry, especially on my chin, although I can see it in other areas as well. It looked absolutely fine up until 8 hours of wear. That was about when it started to look a little bit drying. Anyway, after the first day of use, I think that it's probably a good foundation for events when you just have to have your foundation on for a few hours. Probably not so much for a full day of use, although we'll try it over the next few days and see if a primer or a setting powder helps. On the second day, I applied the foundation still with a brush, but with a primer and a setting powder to see what the difference would be. Basically, everything stayed the same. The dryness still appeared, but it didn't look quite as dry. So it still appeared after about the same amount of time. After about 8 hours, I started to see that my skin was starting to look dry, but it didn't get as bad as quickly as it did the first day with no primer and no setting powder. Other than that, everything was the same. It still blended easily. My makeup still went on nicely over the top. It still looked matte. It still looked kind of natural, but it just lasted a little bit better for me with my slightly dry skin. Once again, I'll insert a clip from the end of that day so you can see again what it looked like. So today I applied the foundation with a brush, the same brush that I used yesterday, the flat top face brush, but I did use a primer and a setting powder as well, and I feel like it's held up a little bit better. I still think it looks a little bit drying, mostly just on my chin, the same as yesterday, but I definitely think it looks better than yesterday. So I think the primer and the setting powder helped. They definitely have improved its wear throughout the day, but I still reckon this is not a full day foundation. I've had it on for 10 hours today, which is not as long as I wore it for yesterday, but it still looks better than it did after 10 hours of wear yesterday, but at the same time it's still just not as flawless as you want your foundation to look at the end of the day. On the third day, I also used a primer and a setting powder, but I applied it with a makeup sponge instead of a brush. Keep in mind that Tarte recommends using a brush for this foundation, so when I applied it with a sponge, I had way less coverage. It was insane. It looked like a completely different foundation. I felt like it didn't look as good. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I think I was just thrown by the coverage, really. Like when you have a medium to full coverage foundation and then it applies with like very little coverage, it just kind of threw me. So I thought that applying it with a makeup sponge might make it not look as drying, but after a few hours it still started to look dry and it still continued to get worse throughout the day, so there was no difference there. Once again, I'll insert a clip from the end of that day as well. So today I applied the foundation with a makeup sponge. I used primer and setting powder, so the only difference from yesterday was applying it with the makeup sponge instead of a brush. Right from first applying it, it has way less coverage than it did with the brush, but the end result at the end of the day is the same. My skin looks drying, mostly on my chin, but I can also see it on my forehead. And even though normally I prefer less coverage, I actually prefer the way this foundation looks when applied with a brush. which makes sense because the website said to apply it with a brush. So both of those days, the setting powder that I used was the Maybelline Fit Me Satin Smooth powder, which is not a mattifying powder, it's just a setting powder. The last couple of days that I've used this foundation, I have used the Rimmel Stay Matte powder with it, which is a mattifying powder. I thought that it would look good and I thought that they would go nicely together because they're both matte products, but when I apply the mattifying powder over top of the matte foundation, it just makes my skin look dry instantly. So once again, I know that my box light makes me look a little bit shiny on camera, but hopefully you can see on my chin especially, this is my most dry area, it does look dry. Even though I've only had my makeup on for half an hour or so. Yeah, so that's a little bit of a surprise because that powder does not make me look dry with any other foundation that I have. So this is definitely the most drying foundation that I own, which I guess is a good thing for people with oily skin. And like I said, the people who I've seen do first impressions who have oily skin, they've said that it looks better and better throughout the day. I guess it's just something to keep in mind if you have normal to dry skin. I would not use a mattifying powder with this, and if you have full-on dry skin, I probably wouldn't even pick this up, to be honest. So I guess my final thoughts after using the foundation for about a week are, firstly, it sets on its own without powder, which I really like. Honestly, it doesn't make a difference, or it didn't make a difference for me whether I used a setting powder or not, it still looked dry after the same amount of time. It has medium to full buildable coverage, which I think is a good thing. It does last a little bit better with primer and powder. Like I said, it still looks dry after the same amount of time, however it doesn't look as dry. The formula I find really easy to blend, however I don't like how it looks with a sponge. Makeup applies nicely over top, however it doesn't matter what I do, it always looks dry by the end of the day. So I know this is very similar to what I said at the end of my first impressions video, but I still have the same opinion that it is not the foundation to wear for a normal to dry skin person if you are planning on wearing your makeup all day. Oily skin is a different story, but I cannot get it to not look dry by the end of the day. However, I do like how it looks before it starts looking dry. So if you're only wearing your makeup for a few hours, if you've got like an event to go to, then yeah, I still do think it's a good foundation. I do like the formula. It is definitely not my favorite foundation, and actually it's my foundation that holds up the least amount of time, but I'm still going to keep it around. I'm still going to use it for times that I'm not wearing my makeup all day. And as I also said in my first impressions video, it's the first full coverage foundation that I haven't hated. Yeah, so those are my thoughts on the Tarte Shape Tape Matte Foundation. I would love to hear your thoughts on it as well. Have you tried it? What do you think? Are you going to try it? Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye!